Welcome to the deep dive. You gave us a fantastic stack of sources on, well, one of Scotland's truly mythic places. A place that's physically gone now, but its spirit is more coveted than ever. We're talking about St. Magdalene.
A lowland single malt distillery that's been silent for what, over 40 years now?
Exactly. And so our mission today is to really unpack its story, its industrial importance, the crisis that killed it, and the legacy of its whiskey, which is now incredibly valuable. Now, let's set the scene. We're in Linlithgow, West Lothian in Scotland. And the story of St. Magdalene just full of contradictions, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, this is the hook for our deep dive. How does a place that started in the Middle Ages as a monastery hospital, a place for healing, end up as this industrial powerhouse of the Lowlands?
And then just vanish.
And then just vanish, despite all that scale and efficiency. That's the story we're getting into.
And that historical depth is exactly why people pay so much for the bottles today. You're not just buying whiskey. You're buying a piece of really deep Scottish history.
So it goes way back.
Oh, yeah. You can trace commercial distilling in Linlithgow back to the mid-1700s. But the operation we're really talking about, it officially began in 1798. It was originally called the Linlithgow Distillery.
But St. Magdalene, that famous name, that comes later.
Correct. That change happened in 1834. They actually moved the distillery into the old surviving buildings of the St. Magdalene Hospital.
Wow.
So you have this centuries-old structure built for charity, for sanctuary, and it's completely repurposed for the mechanical age. It gave the site a kind of historical weight that very few rivals could match.
Okay, so let's unpack the how. How did it become this industrial gold standard? The location wasn't an accident.
No, not at all. It was an industrial masterstroke, pure strategic planning. St. Magdalene was positioned perfectly right between the two most vital bits of 19th century infrastructure.
The Union Canal and the railway.
The Union Canal on one side, connecting Edinburgh and Glasgow, and the new Scottish railway network on the other. It gave them redundancy and incredible reach.
And the sources show they didn't just, use these public routes. They built their own system on top of them. It was deeply integrated.
That's what's so impressive. That level of private control really speaks to their ambition. They had their own private wharf built right on the canal.
And that was for the heavy stuff.
Exactly. For offloading massive amounts of coal and coke to fuel the stills. Trying to haul that over roads would have been a nightmare. Slow, expensive.
But the railway, that must have been the real game changer for high-volume trade.
Absolutely. They had a private railway spur that branched right off the main line.
Just for them?
Just for St. Magdalene. Think about that advantage. They're not waiting in line for public freight. They're moving barley in and, more importantly, huge volumes of finished spirit out.
The barrels, the lagery?
Right. Straight to the blending houses or the ports for export. No middlemen, no delays. They had almost total control of their supply chain.
It's a kind of logistical independence you just couldn't build today. But what about the most important ingredient, the water? They're sitting right on a canal. Was that clean enough to use?
That's a crucial distinction, and it really shows their industrial genius. They did use the canal water, yes, but only for cooling.
So, just for the machinery, running through coils to condense the vapor.
Precisely. It saved a tremendous amount of money. But the process water, the water that actually went into the mash with the barley,
The water for the whiskey itself.
that came from a completely pristine source, a deep artesian well on the property.
So they separated the industrial function from the art of it.
Exactly. Efficiency for the cooling, purity for the flavor.
That's brilliant. Okay, so moving from infrastructure to sheer scale, especially after Distillers Company Limited, DCL, took over, the numbers get kind of staggering here.
And DCL was, the titan of the industry back then, the massive conglomerate that basically controlled the Scottish whiskey market. Once they owned St. Magdalene, it was engineered for pure volume. Its annual capacity was over 1 million liters of spirit.
1 million liters a year. For a lowland distillery, that feels immense.
It is. The sources break down the equipment needed for that. 14 washbacks.
14. That's a huge fermentation capacity.
It is. Plus 5 stills and 19 warehouses on site, just for maturing their own spirit.
19 warehouses.
To put that in perspective, a lot of very famous Speyside distilleries today run on 8 washbacks, maybe fewer, 14. That tells you St. Magdalene was a workhorse. It was a core factory for DCL's blending operations.
Those are things like Johnny Walker or Haig.
Exactly. It was designed to pump out a consistent, high-volume base for the big blends.
Okay, here's the other contradiction. Despite that massive, almost industrial scale, It had this reputation for a really elegant, specific style. So for listeners, how would you define that classic lowland style that St. Magdalene was known for?
Lowland whiskeys are traditionally, well, they're lighter, sometimes triple distilled. The profile is more floral, grassy, maybe some fruity notes. It's a real contrast to the big, smoky Islay whiskeys or the heavy, rich Highland malts.
And St. Magdalene was a prime example of that finesse.
A total exemplar.
So if they're pushing for 1,000,000 liters a year, how did they stop the spirit from just becoming bland or generic? What were the production secrets they held on to?
This is the crucial technical detail from the sources. They kept a really long fermentation time.
Which seems counterintuitive, right? If
Yeah.
you want volume, you want speed.
Usually, yes. Speed is often the enemy of flavor, but here they prioritize flavor development in the washback over just turning it around quickly.
And what does that longer time actually do to the liquid?
Chemically, it lets the yeast create more esters. Esters are the compounds that give you those delicate aromatic notes, the fruit, the flowers.
Ah, I see.
So the spirit was already packed with character before it even hit the copper pot stills. They were ensuring the base liquid had elegance rather than just hoping the cask would do all the work later on.
It wasn't just about the copper stills. It was about giving the yeast time to work its magic.
That's it. And then, of course, the maturation in different casks, ex-bourbon or sherry, would add that final layer of depth. But like we said, the reason the single malts are so rare today is because almost all of that spirit went straight into blends. Finding a single malt bottling is the exception, not the rule.
Which brings us to the tragic part of the story, the closure. I mean, given everything, the location, the capacity, the quality, it just seems crazy that an operation like this would be shut down. Why did DCL close it in 1983?
Well, that closure is part of one of the most painful chapters in whiskey history. It was a direct result of the huge overproduction crisis that hit the industry in the late 70s and early 80s.
We hear that term overproduction crisis a lot. What did it actually mean on the ground?
It was a perfect storm, really. A global recession, for one, but also a big shift in what people were drinking. They were moving to lighter spirits like vodka and gin.
And the whiskey companies had planned for growth.
Massive growth. They'd based their forecasts on the trends of the 60s and 70s, so when demand just plummeted, they were left with, well, lakes of whiskey maturing in warehouses, all this stock tying up capital and space with nowhere to go.
So DCL just had to cut its losses. And St. Magdalene was on the chopping block.
Precisely. They had to rationalize, to cut capacity to match the new market reality. St. Magdalene was closed along with several other big distilleries. It was a cold economic calculation. It had nothing to do with the quality of the spirit.
And if we connect that to today, the physical fate of the site is pretty poignant. The irony comes full circle.
It does. From a hospital to a factory and then to silence. In the 1990s, the main buildings were converted into apartments. The place that once defined industrial Linlithgow now defines, residential suburban life.
But one piece survived, right?
Yeah.
A physical monument that people can still see today.
Yes, and any whiskey fan would recognize it instantly. The kiln. The kiln building, which was used for drying the malted barley, is still standing, and it's topped with that iconic Doig Pagoda chimney.
Ah, the pagoda roof.
It was made a protected historical structure, so while everything else became housing, that spire is still there, a silent reminder of what used to be.
So what does this all mean for the whiskey itself? The fact that the distillery is physically gone is what really drives the mystique and the price tag.
Yeah.
We know it can never be made again.
Absolutely. St. Magdalene is the definition of a lost distillery. The surviving bottles are now incredibly rare single malts, and they are hunted by collectors all over the world. At auction, they command thousands, many thousands of pounds or dollars. It's a serious investment.
So to bring that to life for you, our sources had this wonderful detail on a specific bottling. A 26-year-old distilled in 1982 right before the closure.
And bottled in 2009 at cask strength, 55%.
Let's try to taste it through the nose. What would you get on the nose?
Well, this bottling is a masterclass in that Lowlands style. Visually, it would be this deep golden amber, natural color. On the nose, it's described as incredibly refined, very floral. That's a direct result of that long fermentation we were talking about.
The esters.
The esters. But underneath the flowers and ripe fruit, you get citrus, herbs, and this surprising deep note of old leather and malt.
Leather and flowers. That suggests a very complex interaction with the wood over a long time.
It does, but without being heavy. And the taste confirms it. It's full-bodied, oily, which you'd expect at 55% ABV. But there's this elegant balance. Floral sweetness, dried fruit, citrus, and then a little hint of dark chocolate bitterness to give it structure.
So it's not simple. It's a whiskey that makes you pay attention.
Not at all.
Okay.
And the finish is the final seal of quality. It's described as long, refined, and enduring. Those fruit, spice, and floral notes just linger. St. Magdalene really is a benchmark. It proves you could make a huge volume of spirit that still had finesse and complexity. It set a standard for what an elegant lowland whiskey could be.
So this deep dive has taken us from a medieval hospital through an era of incredible industrial power to its death in a market crash, leaving behind this liquid gold.
It's a perfect microcosm of Scottish industrial history, really. It set a standard for a subtle, complex character that collectors crave, because that exact combination of place, equipment, and technique, well, it can never be put back together again.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on, built right from the sources we looked at. We know St. Magdalene's million-liter output was mostly for the blended whiskey market. We all covet the few single malt bottles that are left. But imagine how much of that elegant spirit, distilled in the late 70s or early 80s, is still out there, still hidden, still contributing its unique lowland DNA to classic long-standing blends that you can still buy today. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many lost flavors are we still subtly tasting every time we pour a classic blended scotch? Thank you for sharing your sources for this deep dive.